Every week, we coordinate and send out photographers to churches all around the world.
These photographers are given a shot list, rules for etiquette, plus a rundown of all the gear to bring.
Today, we're sharing all of that with you, plus example galleries from actual successful church photo shoots can demonstrate what this is all meant to look like.
This is the definitive church photography shot list.
Let's dive in. Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pro Church Tool Show. We're here to help you and your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm Brady Shearer, your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. We call him Father Photoshoot. It's Alexander Mills.
Hello, hello.
And today's episode is broken up into 4 sections. Let's talk about those sections. Number 1, the definition of a successful church photo shoot. Number 2, what to bring. 3, the shot list. And number 4, rules and etiquette for church photographers. So let's begin with number 1, our definition for a successful church photo shoot. And it reads like this, quote, "A successful church photo shoot is all about capturing the organic nature of church life with an emphasis on the people." And there are 2 operative words in this definition, organic and people. And there's 2 reasons why this is so important. Number 1, obviously the theological reason, right? The church is the people. It's not the building. It's not the programming. You know, sometimes when I think about visiting restaurants, I like to compare it to visiting churches for the first time. And if you went to a restaurant's Google business profile, if you went to their website, ideally you would see something related to their menu. You would see what it looks like. I don't know about you, when I go to a TripAdvisor or a Google business profile for a restaurant I'm going to for the first time, I will look at their photos and be like, what does your burger actually look like? And churches, we don't have product, right? We don't have like something to sell. What we have are faith communities. And what are the substances of that community? It is the people.
Yeah, and that's why a successful church photo shoot doesn't look like an architectural shoot where you're capturing a bunch of great photos of a really nice building or a really big building or a nice LED wall, but it's photos that tell the story of the community in still frames, which can be a little bit more challenging in some instances than like shooting live video clips. And so you've got one chance with one still photo to tell the story of a church. And the story of the church is not about the building. It's not about the architecture. It is about the people, the bodies that make up the collective capital C church. So I think it's just so appropriate that we start there, that the definition of a successful church photo shoot, first and foremost, is rooted in like theological convictions.
Yeah, and the idea is people, but what's the other operative term in that definition? Organic. And this is the part that I think is really just as important because, yeah, you can have staff stand against a wall and take their headshots for the staff page, which is important, but the idea is you want to see things that are happening organically.
Yes.
Coming out of the Olympics, like what are the most, the images that are echoing in our mind from the Olympics are those photos of people like in the moment doing these amazing things. And it's organic. It was happening. It was real. It felt honest.
The image that's seared in my mind from the Olympics is an Australian breakdancer by the name of Ray Gunn.
Yeah, we're probably a bit late to this conversation at this point by the time, man, that was...
that was crazy. But the memes, they're still going.
Yeah, praise God for that. So the first reason, theological. Second is practical. And I love when we get this intersection, right? Like we talk often about the intersections of faith and culture for subject matter, for social media content, for sermon content, whatever you might be doing. What I also love is when something makes sense missionally for a church and it's the best option for effectiveness.
Right.
Because you can't choose effectiveness if it goes against your church's mission, which means sometimes we are choosing things that are not the most effective because we're like, hey, my convictions and our church's mission is this. Yes, this would work.
Sure.
But would we be okay with ourselves if we did it? When those 2 things are the same thing, that's great because a photo can communicate in an instant what would take paragraphs worth of text. And so as we go through the specifics in the upcoming sections of this episode of gear and framing and the list of the shots that we need, I just want everyone to continue to remind yourself of the philosophy that underpins all of this, which is organic and people. Organic and people. Now, at the top of the show, we said that every week we send out photographers to churches all around the world. I would not be surprised if some of you heard that and were curious.
Yeah, what do you mean?
What does that actually mean? This used to be what I used to say.
I'm getting shipped out every week.
It's crazy. This man hasn't seen his children in years. His family he's told his sons, oh yeah, he's deployed. That's what we've gone with at this point. It's like when I used to say,
he's a sharpshooter.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, sister sharpshooter. That's Ray Gunn. You like that? They were making it relevant again.
Yeah.
So, I used to say, and it's true, I'd be like, I've delivered 15,000 church announcements. And people are like, okay, like before we go any further, can we like unpack that? Of course, I used to do video announcements for churches. It was like all I did. And so that's how that added up. How are we sending out photographers to churches all around the world every single week? It's part of our commitment that we announced earlier this year, this ambitious campaign, the most ambitious project we've ever done, giving 1,000 churches free website makeovers by the end of 2025. Now, we haven't given podcast listeners an update on that in a little while. So as of this recording, more than 1,500 churches are on the waiting list for free website makeovers. And right now, there are 173 church website makeovers in progress.
Wow.
We are working at a rapid pace, but we wanted to work even faster. I posted on Instagram stories, hey, if you want to help us build church websites, apply. In under 24 hours, we had, I think, 275 applications.
Yeah.
So we've been working through those. If you want to join the waiting list at nucleus.church, you can do so. Just click the big free makeovers button. Now you might think, well, if there are 1,500 churches on the waiting list and you're only doing 1,000, why would I join the waiting list? What kind of fool do you make me out to be? Well, right now we're seeing about a 50% response rate from the waiting list. People will join the waiting list and we'll say, hey, it's your time. And then they're like, oh, now's not a good time.
Yeah.
Or they don't get back to our email or whatever. So if that plays out continually, that would mean we'd need more than 2,000
We've got
churches.
room.
That's right. So join the waiting list, nucleus.church.
So you said 173 makeovers currently in process. And part of rebuilding these churches' websites, making them over on the Nucleus platform, is sending a photographer to each one of those churches to take photos that we can use for these church website makeovers. So by those numbers, we have coordinated, or likely around 170
That's right.
photo shoots
Correct.
all over the globe.
And it's been like 8 weeks, so that's a lot.
It's
per
been
week.
it's been a lot of work. And so for each of these photographers, we're giving them guidelines. Hey, you're going to this church. This is what we need from these photos. This is what we expect from you. And we have some suggestions. And so next, what should they bring?
Yeah, and the reason that this is important is because in the pilot project for the makeover campaign, before we announced it to the world, before we opened up the waiting list, we had tested it with some churches. And before we had built our church photography network of trusted and very capable church photographers, we had, explored a couple of different avenues.
Right.
And one of those avenues was using a secular service, the, Uber for photography. I'm not going to name this service. I'm not going to shame this service, though I should. Because we had sent out a photographer and we had given them this guide, and they rolled up to church on a Sunday morning, and they had like studio lights, and they had like giant flags, and they're like, where can I set up the tripod? And the person at this church, who I know,
Oh, geez.
because they were part of the pilot
Yeah.
project, they were like, dude, who did you just send us? And
Yeah,
I was
that
like,
was
I
not
don't know
it.
what happened. He's like, man, I was trying to drum, and like it all went bad. So
we had to take things into our own hands.
here's what not to bring. Studio lights. Okay,
we'll start there.
You always want to work with the natural lighting conditions of the church building. Now, this would not be true if you're doing staff headshots.
Sure.
Also, don't do those on a Sunday morning. And then the second thing, tripods. Unless you're doing a really stylistic type of shot, like
Long exposure or something.
Yeah, a long exposure outside of the church building. But then you're just bringing extra gear.
Yeah.
The only other reason would be maybe because you need to let in a ton of light. But at that point, you're just going to get such crazy shutters. Just leave the tripod at home.
Yeah.
Run and gun is the way to go for a shoot like this. So what do you want to bring? There are the obviouses. The obvious things, make sure you have an SD card, spare battery, but specific long lenses are always going to be your best friend during a church photo shoot. So you can capture interactions and sacred moments from afar. What's great about a long lens is that you can stand 20, 30, 50 feet away from what's happening, and the final photo and frame and composition can feel like it's up close and it's intimate, and you get that organic moment, right? That's that operative term. But in person, you're not right up in somebody's grill. Next, fast lenses.
Yeah.
And this is to deal with the low lighting of some church sanctuaries. Frankly, almost all church sanctuaries and buildings are going to struggle with lighting in some respect. You might just be filming kids ministry, taking some shots of kids ministry, and they've got the overhead fluorescent lighting, and it's just real rough. And you're like, I'm barely getting enough light here. Fast lenses. So when we say fast lenses, an aperture of 2.8 or lower, greater, however you want to, quantify that. If you're shooting with a full frame camera, obviously, 2.8 is going to be great. If you're on, an APS-C, maybe
2.0, 1.8.
Yeah, right. That might be something that you want to look into. What's great though about these new cameras also is that they are tremendously skilled in low light conditions, especially if you're shooting with a Sony, which right now is our preferred camera manufacturer and has been for many years. You can just dial up that ISO to something crazy 6400 or 12,800 before it switches over to like the second ISO. And now you can like basically see in the dark. So there are more ways to get around this. You also have intelligent denoise powered by AI and platforms like Lightroom. And you've done a bunch of church photo shoots, not quite 173 over 8 weeks all around the world that you have been deployed. Anything else that you'd say do or do not bring?
I mean, in my kit, I shoot a lot with prime lenses. And so if that's like your style of photography, you're going to want to bring a variety of lenses too, so that you have some variety in the shots that you actually end up delivering. And in all of these things, we're talking about what to bring in. We're going to talk about etiquette a little bit later, but I'm noticing as we're talking about this, the things that we're recommending bringing and the things we're recommending leaving at home. Like there are two elements to, it's a double-edged sword or a two-sided coin to being a successful church photo shoot. One, of course, is the deliverable. These are great photos. But in church, the other side of it being successful is that you don't interrupt the sacred space. And so a lot of these things here contribute to that. So it's like, right, leaving the studio lights at home. We don't need those in the worship space. The tripod, leave it at home so that you can be less intrusive. Same with the long lens. That lets you get closer to a sacred private moment without interfering with it. And so, like I said, we'll talk about the specifics of etiquette later on, but even with the gear, this is being mindful. The choices we're making here, recommending folks to make, are being mindful of how to shoot specifically in a church. And so the fast lenses, of course, because a lot of church worship spaces, sanctuaries now, especially in the West, are like low light environments. So you're going to need as much light as possible. But these other things really do contribute to kind of pulling off that fly on the wall posture when you're shooting in a church space, which you don't always have to be as mindful of in other spaces.
Yeah, we also understand that different churches have different preferences for like what they capture and do not capture. Like if you're listening and you're like, I would never capture a sacred moment of someone raising their hands or like a prayer moment. Like we just don't do that type of thing. Like, hey, more power to you. Yeah. The long lens is just as useful for capturing people that are being greeted at the front door of the church walking in. Like, greeter is shaking hands with someone coming in, their family. You're right up there with a 16, mil lens.
Yeah.
Kind of strange.
Yeah.
But you've got like, an 85 or like a 200 and you're like dialed into 150 mils from far away. Like, great. Perfect.
Yeah. And that helps you capture those, we've talked about it, those organic, sometimes candid moments that you can get from a distance.
Candid. Very nice.
Yeah. That you can't get from up close when, you're interrupting a real life event.
All right. Next section, the specific shot list.
Yeah.
So I like to break this down into the key moments to capture before, during, and after service. If you're planning your church's photo shoot, think of it in those three chunks. There's before service, there's during service, and there's after service. And we'll get into like specific compositions and framing here in a moment. But when you're planning your morning, you're planning your service, it's great to think about it in those three chunks. So before service, this is taking photos of the parking lot as people arrive, greeters at the front door, welcoming people, people in the foyer or the lobby, and then people grabbing a coffee. So there's a lot of really great kinetic energy as people are mingling and interacting, and a lot of that can be accomplished before service. I like to do that because then I can really focus on what's happening during service, and I don't feel like, I missed a bunch.
Yeah. So what you're saying is I can't arrive at 10:29.
For a service that starts at 11:30, I think that's perfectly appropriate. Perfectly appropriate. All right, then you have your worship service. So capturing close-ups of the music and worship team from the back of the room, congregation worshiping up close, congregation worshiping in a wide shot, the MC spot or announcements, preacher walking on stage, preacher preaching, altar call, prayer. Obviously, those are going to be covered. Yeah. And then finally, after service, capturing photos of people at the connection booth, people getting prayed for, people waving goodbye. Depending on your church's culture, sometimes the lobby before service is a lot
thin.
Listen. That's how it goes sometimes. Yeah. And so the before stuff, maybe you focus more on parking lot because you don't need like a really full parking lot to get that. You focus on the greeters because you don't get greeters after service, but all the lobby, you really focus on after service for that. Maybe that's the way to go. All right, specific items. And these are kind of just 7 checklist items. So authentic moments of worship, eyes closed, hands raised, prayer, band on stage. That's number 1. Number 2, authentic moments of human interaction, folks talking and smiling, conversations, etc. Number 3, authentic moments of people moving around the church. So this is entering the building, entering the sanctuary, mingling in the lobby, the flow of people brushing shoulders with each other. Again, this is what all the candid moments, all the organic moments are happening here. Number 4, the pastor preaching, people listening. Number 5, exterior and establishing shots of the building and parking lot.
Do you need a few?
On a recent episode, we talked about Google Business Profiles and how specifically for the photos that you upload to your Google Business Profile, you need those exterior shots. So you want to make sure that you get those. Number 6, details. So a church pew, cup of coffee, stack of bulletins. I always find these tremendously useful for filler on church website, filler on social media. The nice thing is like, yeah, I could download a stock photo of a pew or a bulletin or, a communion cup or whatever it might be, light entering through a window anywhere. But if you capture it in your own church, it's going to match all the other photos aesthetically.
That's right.
And then also it will be of your church, which is of course good. And then this one, I feel like sometimes people sometimes they overlook.
Totally.
A mix of portrait and landscape orientation.
What's your preference? Like when you're shooting, not mindlessly shooting, you're just like capturing something. What's your orientation?
Oh, with a camera?
Yep.
Yeah, it's got to be landscape because
Really?
Yeah, because I'm from video.
Right.
And so like this is what I mean, like my brain is broken because
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, look at this perfectly composed frame," because I've been video pilled in my brain.
Yeah.
But obviously, I've found not obviously. What I should say is I have found the portraits to be more useful in building church websites lately.
Yeah.
That being said, in the hero section, I do always want that kind of like
you need a landscape.
Yeah,
so that's why
perfect
you're saying you need a good mix of both. And it's so important that we're mentioning that here because it's something to easily get overlooked. And I think as photographers, we all have kind of a subconscious default to like a way we prefer to shoot. For me, it's portrait. I think for me, that's a little bit informed that like I have on my 5D Mark IV, I have the battery grip extension that has another shutter release on it. So when I switch to portrait, I'm not reaching over top of the camera. It's in the same spot. So it's super comfy for me to shoot that way. But we do all have that unconscious bias. And it's important to remember that we're delivering content for churches that needs to be multi-purpose. And so, yeah, for social, the portrait photos are really useful. But for a hero section on a website, we need something that's landscape. And so just keeping this in the back of your mind, saying it to yourself, whispering it to yourself as you walk in is really going to be helpful to deliver a wide enough array or variety of shots that are going to be useful across all the different uses that the church is expecting to use these photos for.
Yeah, and speaking of being a non-invasive presence, maybe shooting with a camera that's not the size of a briefcase would be ideal.
Listen, I will hold on to my mirrored camera for as long as I can.
Yeah, okay. So there's another thing worth mentioning here.
It's also part of the reason that I don't really shoot photos anymore is because my camera's so large. Yeah. I can't reasonably travel with it.
Well, you have to check the bag.
Yeah, exactly.
Just oversized. Yeah. So there's a rule in video I've heard and I like the rule of 3, and the idea is when you're filming B-roll and you have a certain subject that you want to capture it 3 different ways. So like even an exterior shot of the building. Okay, I want to capture it landscape. I want to capture it portrait, and then maybe I'm going to use a different lens. And the best photographers that we've worked with do a very good job of providing similar compositions in a variety of different frames. So like there'll be someone raising their hand and from behind is like where the photo's taken. And they'll have one that's like really tight portrait. They'll have one that's like landscape, and then they'll have one where I can tell they changed the lens because the depth of the shot is different and the compression has changed. And so that's a really great way of increasing the number of photos that you take away from a Sunday morning shoot that are useful. What's also true is we've all been there where you're like, I have this shot. I want to use it, but like I need it in this orientation, or I need it with a bit more headspace, or I need it in a different angle. And that's why the rule of 3, if you focus on that in the moment, then you'll be set.
Well, I mentioned earlier that I prefer to shoot with prime lenses, but this probably accentuates the point why some zoom lenses are going to be really useful for you in a shoot like this. Now, it can be trickier to get fast zoom lenses compared to prime lenses.
Fast zoom lenses that are affordable. Like I think for most, going with multiple primes, yes, you lose the convenience, but like it's probably more accessible.
Yeah. But if you have the zoom lens in the bag, like that's why a 16 to 35 or 24 to 70 2.8 or the 70 to 200 2.8.
24 to 105.
Ooh, I've never had that one.
Yeah,
but
it's an f4. Yeah. But like on a full frame with the Sony, you get away with it.
And that's where you get, if you're capturing a moment that's happening, maybe a worship moment, maybe like you said, from behind someone raising their hands, and it's just happening for a moment, you can get those 3 compositions with the zoom lens, where it would be a little more tricky to get with prime lens.
Absolutely. All right, final section, rules and etiquette. Number 1, wear dark colors. You never want to be an obtrusive presence. Dark shirts and pants are especially useful if your church has a darker sanctuary. And don't forget the shoes. Maybe
it's not the time to flex the new Jordans.
Leave the white forces at home.
Honestly.
Especially because sometimes, depending on the lights, like you can like, maybe there's like a black light or something and they get like,
Yes,
like one of
you're
those
glowing,
types.
yeah.
Rule number 2, shoot with a long lens.
Yeah.
We already captured this. We talked about that. Number 3, burst mode. Okay, so when people are talking in the lobby, you might nail focus and framing, but then there's that one person in the group that has that not so flattering expression on their face. Burst mode will give you more options, fractions of seconds apart, to hopefully find that shot where everyone looks their best. One of the things that women want Instagram husbands to know about photography is like you need to take 800 shots to get the one shot. And that's also true of church photography. Some of the photographers that I think are the most talented in the church space, I'll ask them like, okay, how many shots are you like taking? And then how many are you actually finding usable? And they're like, oh yeah, like I'm throwing away most of what I shoot. And I don't know if people understand that if you don't do this type of thing a lot, like so much of what you shoot is going to be junk. And so being able, when there are people, like when you're capturing the greeting, when you're capturing the lobby moments, the candid moments on stage, just like letting that burst mode go. And that way you come away with something that's great, even if 90% of it was not.
Yes. Can I insert a bonus tip here in relation to that? Some folks are hesitant to shoot on burst mode because you come home from a shoot with 1,000 photos and it's like, you get a little bit of anxiety at the scope of culling those down. It's like, how do I get 200 great photos out of 1,000 photos? Like, it just seems like a lot of work.
Sure.
From my wedding photographer days, I have a 2-step culling process that I learned from someone else that I think would be really helpful to hear. Which is I go through in Lightroom, I hit L twice, I think. I get rid of all the, I forget what the mode is called, but I get rid of all the dials and the sliders, so it's just the photos. And I go through with my cursor and I'm using the letter P to select picks. So these are photos that I just like are good enough for a first pass.
Not PIC, but like I pick you.
Right. I will filter those out. So now I have just the picks. So let's say if I shot 1,000, let's say I'm down to like 600 or 500. Then I do the same thing. I go back again and I'm looking for selects now. So now I have a better pool of photos to cull from. And now if I have 3 burst photos from the same moment that I picked out of maybe 8, now I'm looking for the 1 or the 2, and I'm marking those with 5 stars. And then again, I will filter out the 5 stars out of those picks. And now all of a sudden I have a group of 200, 300 photos that I have culled down, and now I'll just edit those ones. So that's my 2-step culling process.
Leave the 99, people. Think about it.
That's right.
All right. Next up, never ask for poses. So a group of people are chatting in the lobby. You approach them and you say like, oh, just taking a few photos, act natural. At that point, of course, nobody is going to act natural. And this is something that, again, like until you've done it and realized that wasn't effective, it might make sense. Like you want people to be aware of you. Maybe if they see me taking photos, they'll be self-conscious. But if like I acknowledge it, then they won't be. I can see the merit behind the idea, the thinking there. But what we found is if you acknowledge it, it just becomes uncomfortable. So just don't ask for poses. Unless, of course, I had one person push back. Like, no. Every time I ask for poses, it works. Hey, I guess, rules are meant to be broken.
Sure.
And then finally, capture worship during practice.
This is such a hack.
It's a pro tip. So maybe you're getting the greeting at the doors. Maybe you are getting the parking lot. And then you're like, I'd love to get some worship shots, but I need to be a non-intrusive presence. Well, you don't need to be a non-intrusive presence during worship practice. You can get right up and get some really creative angles, stuff that like if you shot that when people are in the room, be like, oh, this is strange. Like I can see the photographer right up in that person's business. You don't need to use a long lens. Get to 16, go really wide and shoot like up, really wide and shoot down and get some really creative angles during worship practice. Also, make use of the 3 galleries that we have linked in the YouTube description for this episode or in the podcast description for this episode. 3 galleries from actual church photo shoots that we've done. It's a lot to talk about this. And again, remember that underpinning philosophy, organic, with an emphasis on the people. If you want to see what an actual church photo shoot looks like and get framing ideas, get composition ideas. This is another pro tip. I always have an album on my camera in my phone for how I want to compose. So I'll just look through what people have done. Oh, that's an interesting composition. That's a fun framing. And then I have those as examples for reference images. And then in the moment I can pull out, okay, what else did I haven't caught one of those yet. And then I can capture that where the composition, you're not copying the photo, but like the composition was like, oh, this foreground, this background, this type of framing with this type of lens and this type of compression. Always a great tip. So go through those galleries. Any final notes, Father Photoshoot?
Well, listen, I'll just tell you, I looked through all these galleries again, just prepping for this podcast. I'd seen all these photos before, but I just wanted to swipe through them again. And I felt, I'm sure you know this feeling, like that little flame of creative inspiration in my
Right.
chest. Like I haven't been creative with a camera in quite some time. And I was looking at these photos, they're so beautiful. I was like, oh, I can do this. And so that's what I felt looking at these photos, and I'd seen them before. So please check out those galleries, they'll be linked. And I hope you get that little flame of inspiration too. You'll notice that the photographer for gallery 1 and 2, I think, definitely went to worship practice, because he was definitely using like a 16 mil lens, like all up in the worship leader's grill. And you can't do that during worship service, but the photos look so awesome. So don't hesitate to check those out.
Make use of those links. And thanks as always for your time, attention, and trust. We will talk to you next Wednesday. See, like my brain literally cannot think of a single pun right now. It's like,
You can't use Bishop Beige.
no,
Been there, done that.
Been there, done that. And that was already like a last minute, like, oh. I believe in me. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Don't say a word, okay? I'm going to come up with it. But you have to be silent. Thank you. It's not working.